I'm not sure how many people we're gonna send this to, but basically, Gia and I decided that we're gonna start making a channel, and other ground students can do debates, and we'll post them here as well. This way, we can all kind of like see where we're at, and also like share them without everyone having to download all Zoom videos. So yeah, I think we're sending this to Mr. Nazio, probably some other students like Sammy and Nudge. So basically, we're doing we did the topic that this house would require all United States students to spend a semester studying out of the country. But we defined this house as the United States government, U.S. students as all U.S. public school university students, as semester as a standard semester. And the definition and the resolution are in the description, unless I forgot to put them there. In which case, text me and I'll do it. Yeah, so the case is I was government and Gia was opposition. And yeah, if, since we're looking for feedback, if you want to give us scoring for each speech, that would be very helpful. And if you could, or if you don't want to do that, if we could get some comments, especially on the logic part. The delivery part we want to work on a little later, but the logic part is super important to us right now. And yeah, we also thought of this thing because we're pretty competitive people that like if you think government wins, you should give the video a like, and if you think opposition wins, you should dislike it. And we want to see, yeah, we want to see who wins. Cool. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In an increasingly globalized world, where countries communicate and trade with each other all the time, we are seeing greater and greater issues because our people are just not communicating and not having enough access to markets in other countries, largely because they have a lack of connections. We also don't have access to their extensive marketplace of ideas and cultures to help our country grow like the rest of the world. Because we don't have these like borders and easy to cross borders like Europe or Asia, we need to find some other way to educate our citizens. That's why the government wants to propose our plan today to require all United States students to spend a semester studying out of the country, because we believe that that will ultimately be good for the welfare of the United States. Our plan is simple. We make every student spend one semester abroad, and it will be a government organized trip with financial aid for some students. And we will collaborate with other countries. This way, they can fill our vacant spots in our universities and colleges while our students can stay at theirs. This way, we minimize the cost and maximize the safety of our students. For paying for plane tickets, the government will cover that. After all, it will only cost a few $1 billion a year, and because of all we gain, we think it is definitely worth it. There will, of course, be exceptions, as always, if someone's an international student or if someone really cannot leave the country. They won't have to do this. What is your question?
For someone who is not on financial aid, is there an opportunity to opt out or do you lose your graduation?
Well, look, there are exceptions, but reasonable exceptions. And they can't just be, I don't want to go, right? It could be, I don't have the financial resources to go. And if that really is unattainable, someone can stay. And we have exceptions for all sorts of other things, like physical education. And those are requirements as well, right? But after establishing our plan, let's go on to a few of our points. Our points are as follows. The first is for personal growth of students. Our second is cultural growth for the country. And our final is the economic growth that this will sow. Let me begin with the first one, personal growth. Of course, students with new experiences will grow more. They will be plopped into a new situation in a new demographic, which will require them to thrive in order to thrive, to learn and gain more understanding, turning them into a more developed person. It also allows them to gain academically, as we can see, because different universities, especially high level ones, have different approaches to learning. One example of this is MIT, which offers an exchange student program with some colleges in England, such as Cambridge University. And students have found the methodologies that they require really help them in the future because they now have two ways of approaching each problem. After all, gaining knowledge and habits on how to do things better, how to approach academics better, and being a more developed person helps help these students gain a better future, thus help benefit them in their welfare. Our second contention is cultural growth for the country. And this is because new diversity of ideas will cause a bunch of positive things in our country. Well, let me establish that there is a new diversity of ideas that will come. First of all, people with different perspectives will actually come to our country in this exchange program. And second of all, the students that we send out will one day return with new experiences, which also give them new perspectives. The impact here is that political, religious, and ethnic diversity will make us more unified as a country because we all understand a little bit more about those around us, thus going and benefiting our welfare. And our final is our economic growth. And this is divided between the macroeconomy and the individuals, and then the individual's economic gains. In the macroeconomy, because of all these connections that you can make in your college time, even in one semester, it helps people gain opportunities and communicate with people who might be able to work with them in the future. This helps us maximize the global economic efficiency by allowing people whose labor is better utilized in a different country to gain connections and maybe one day go there, improving the economy for the United States and for the rest of the world. And it also benefits the individual because this extended networking also provides them with more opportunities to grow and gain wealth as well, and gain opportunities. So thus, because the whole economy grows and because it's better for individual students, it obviously benefits our welfare. Our plan today addresses the key issues of our day, the key issues our students face as they exit college. And I urge you, Mr. Speaker, to vote in favor of this resolution to help us spur personal growth, cultural growth, and economic growth. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Personal growth. Okay, wait, shit. All right.
I'm not cutting that.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Personal growth. Oh my days! Just get the Jiang, like I'm literally in the middle of the day. Please, just
Okay. Just get my wait.
Okay. Oh, take three. Please close it up. All right. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Personal growth, cultural growth. Significant personal benefits as well as benefits for the United States economy. However, they also need to prove that the difference in perspectives and all of these positive benefits that they claim in their speech can't be accomplished, or at least can't be accomplished as well within our own country, which would obviously save a lot of money. In this speech, I'd like to do a following few things. Firstly, I'd like to refute the points introduced by side government. Secondly, I'd like to introduce side opposition's rationale, and then 3 contentions under that rationale. So onto their first contention. They claim that it's going to lead to personal growth because it's going to allow students to have new experiences, which is going to allow them to grow more, and they're going to have academic gains. And they talk about MIT and MIT's exchange program. However, we can do this, we can allow students to have new experiences and to grow more without sending them into a different country. For example, students could go to different states that are vastly different in terms of our culture and in terms of the religion that they are surrounded by on their academic campus. They can be exposed to new political ideologies that, for example, would extend beyond the political ideology that's prevalent on their specific campus, and thus achieve these new experiences and these new intellectual experiences that side governments want in a far more cost-effective way. Additionally, you could send them to academic think tanks, which would further their experience, which would ultimately benefit them by providing them the opportunity to grow more from these new political ideas, once again, without the need to send students into a far different country. Side government's plan of sending kids into new countries in order to gain new experience, while has a valiant goal of expanding their horizons, doesn't actually need to be to this extent in which side government claims. Now, onto side government's second contention. But before I go into their second contention, I'd like to take their point.
Would you agree that generally speaking, the U.S. is more consistent in ideology between states than, say, between U.S. and a completely different country of demographics?
So I think the extent to which a country is similar or different to another country in comparison to one state being different or with another state depends abundantly on the different country that you go to. For example, if we go to Canada or if we go to Mexico, the similarities are going to be of vastly different scale. So one country that citizens go to might be much similar to the United States, and it really depends on the specific country, which is another problem with side government's plan that I'm going to get to in my third contention. So they talk about in their second contention that it's going to allow cultural growth, and there are going to be different perspectives and different religions, which is going to enable students to be more tolerant. But once again, this is similar to my refutation of their first contention, in that you don't actually need to send students into an entirely different country in order to gain this benefit of new religions and different religions, and thus the tolerance that arises from it. And now the third contention talks about economic growth, and that it's going to allow students to have a bunch of connections, which is going to benefit the United States economy and the specific individuals greatly. However, there's no guarantee that the connections that they're developing in these other countries is actually going to be economically beneficial. And that's another thing that side government has to prove, that these connections that they develop aren't just connections and have some economic incentive and reward at the end, which is something that side government hasn't done yet. So onto our rationale. Once again, just like side government, we believe that the United States government has an obligation to protect the welfare of our students. And under that rationale, we have three contentions. Firstly, it's economically infeasible. Secondly, it's wasteful of time. And thirdly, it's not holistically effective. So going on to our first contention, it's economically infeasible. State universities already have a fairly tight budget. The United States currently is $1.2 trillion in debt with student loan debt. It's fiscally irresponsible to say that we can additionally send all of these students into different countries in order to get these perceived benefits, which, as I've shown in my refutation to their first and second contention, we can gain directly from within our own country without the need for side government's plan. Now, onto our second contention, it's that it's wasteful of time. It takes a lot of time away from students who have their labs a lot of the time within the specific university. Now, if we were to send these students to other countries, we can't guarantee that they're going to get the same level of academic rigor that they would on their current campus. We don't know if they would have the same resources. And there are so many other variables that side government can't control for, depending on the country and the place and the specific time in which you go to it. And thus it's wasteful of time, and it won't necessarily guarantee that the student is going to get the same level of academic education that he would otherwise get on the actual campus. And now onto our third contention. It's not holistically effective. And this is something I alluded to at the beginning of my speech when side government asked the point of information. There are simply so many different countries, and there are so many different variables that go into how similar or how effective the country is. And unless there's some actually standardized way of measuring how effective the country is going to be when we send students there, we don't know how much it's going to be effective. For some students, they might go to a really great country that is very different from the United States. They might go to a country and a place that has really great laboratories, and thus they can further their academic excellence significantly. And then for other countries, they would go, and especially for countries that don't have as much money, and this is largely stemmed from state universities not having very much money and not being able to send students to a great college, there would be a significant disparity between the value that students get if they're wealthier and they go to a university that has a lot of money compared to a country that doesn't have a lot of money. I'll take the point of information.
Would you agree that send a program that would send students to other states in the United States should be passed?
I think there's side opposition does agree that there's tremendous benefit in exposing students to new cultures. We just don't believe, side opposition just does not believe that it's necessary to send students to entirely different countries in order to procure these benefits. So in conclusion, I've done the following three things. Firstly, I've refuted side government's contentions, showing that the values that they've provided are ultimately good, but unnecessary, but but their plan is unnecessary in order to achieve those values. I've shown that and in addition, I've shown that our rationale is upheld in that we as side opposition protects the welfare of our students because one, it's but we can't pass their plan because it's economically infeasible. It wastes students' time, and it's not holistically effective, and it vastly depends on how wealthy a student is. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a fact that the problems in the status quo that we've established are agreed upon by everyone in this debate. We all know that students need more personal growth, and our country needs more cultural growth. And gaining more experiences would be to the benefit of this. And the opposition agrees with us too. They just think we should do it in a different way which we'll address imminently. I want to start off by elaborating a little bit more on our plan. Again, it's an exchange program, right? So students actually get to pick between which schools they might want to go to. And students who are working on research projects would necessarily pick schools on which they can continue their projects. Otherwise, space out their projects or research so that they have a semester where they're free from doing any research, which most college students end up having. Of course, if it's untenable for them to do this, we mentioned already there are exceptions. And with that clarification, let me move on to rebuilding some of our own contentions. Our first and second contention were personal growth and cultural growth. And the opposition kind of addressed these with the same argument, that there's a better way to do it. That the US, why don't we just send them to different states inside of the US? The fact is, sure, there might be some benefits there. There are going to be slightly different demographics. But at the end of the day, the fundamental political demographic, the fundamental cultural demographic is American. And US is still the United States. There's just not as much diversity of thought that they get exposed to. The opposition talked about Canada and Mexico as countries that are relatively similar to the U.S., and thus they say that going to these countries is not necessarily better. But even in these countries, there's a substantially greater diversity of opinions that our students would be exposed to. Look at Canada, for example. Politics and even much of their culture seems similar to ours, but there are different aspects of different cultural norms. And their politics is fundamentally different politics, different parties that support completely different policies, which would be great immersion for our students. It would help them grow personally and grow culturally. And fundamentally, the fact is, having students go from state to state is just not as effective, not as immersive as having them go to a different country. With that, I'd like to move on to our third contention. And we didn't have time to elaborate and expound on this contention in great detail. So we'll address our opponent's misunderstanding right now. They said that they don't really understand how this connection would help us bolster our economy, even though I think they even acknowledged that the individual side would probably still benefit from having more connections and thus more opportunities abroad. So let's talk about the macroeconomics part. When we talk about the benefit to the macroeconomy, we're talking about the correct allocation of capital, of labor, of the most efficient way we can utilize talent. And that means that we need people to have a wide variety of choices for occupation or where they want to work. This way they can choose the one in which their work is valued the most, and thus they probably contribute the most. And when we expand that pool to a bunch of different countries and have workers in a ton of different countries looking at the US as well, we maximize our economic efficiency. So our third contention stands regardless, actually, of this macroeconomics point, because just based on the individual point, our rationale of welfare is supported and this resolution should pass. But the macroeconomics point just adds on to it. And with that, I'd like to go on to refute some of our opponents' contentions. The first was that our plan is economically infeasible. They say it's fiscally irresponsible. We don't have enough money to send these people abroad. But that's simply not true. right? There are about, say, 2-3 million public school college students, maybe slightly more than that. But think about how much it actually costs us to send them to different countries. Some plane tickets, when organized by the country, by the nation, by the government, can be extremely cheap because you're buying in bulk. Probably somewhere around $100 per person, even for overseas. So if we can say that, even though we can't quantify personal and cultural growth in a monetary number, we can for economic though. If we can say that we'll probably bring students maybe $1 per month more quality of life or gain than they would originally have with this, that would literally justify our program in 20 years. This makes total economic sense. And at the end of the day, it probably cost the United States less than $1 billion. Totally beneficial, definitely economically justifiable. And our second contention is that their second contention was that it's a waste of time. There are labs in colleges, and students would simply not be able to attain their same standard of academic rigor. But this argument that students won't be able to thrive academically is not true. As we've already expressed, students now gain more practices, different methodologies from so many diverse perspectives that they'll be benefited in the long run. And even in the short term, they won't be significantly hindered, since this type of growth will ultimately help them in their own studies as well. Plus, we mentioned if someone really can't find the time, really are booked out in terms of labs, and they can't go to one of these, an exception can be made for select scenarios. But that's a very small minority, and for the vast majority of people, of university students, this won't be a waste of time and will be extremely beneficial. The third, and also, I would like to mention that their second contention is actually conceded to us. They said that they believed a state-to-state program should be passed, which means that they don't actually believe this waste of time theory that they have, because if they did, they also wouldn't support students going to other states, because that would mean that their academics might be hindered as well, or that they can't pursue the labs that they were pursuing. So even by their own reasoning, they actually concede that this point is not true. So on to their third contention. They say that it's just not a good strategy and there's a different state approach. And we've already addressed this in our own contentions, so I feel no need to express it more here. All I have to say is we know that there's more immersion here and students will gain more from going to a different country. At the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, this debate is going towards a direction that talks about whether or not their effective counterplan is better than our plan. But I'd like to remind you that there are two dimensions of the government's case, the economic case and the growth case. And I believe, because we have justified that our plan is better in both domains, that you should vote in favor of this resolution. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In this final speech, I'd like to do the following three things. Firstly, I'd like to provide a refutation to side government's points. Secondly, I'd like to re-bolster side opposition's points. And then finally, boil this debate down to the crux. So, in response to their first and second contention on personal growth and cultural growth, side opposition responded in our first speech that we can do this without sending students to different countries, like go to different states or go to different academic think tanks. In response, side government said that it's too politically and culturally different in other states, such that there's vast benefits of sending students to other countries. But why can't we learn about these different political ideologies? We can just read about them even within our own universities. Once again, there's absolutely no need why we need to spend, as side government said, billions of dollars in order to send students to different countries, just to have them learn about slightly different political beliefs that are outside the realm of United States political thinking and political ideology. No, thank you. And my second response to their refutation was that my second response is actually directly related to their part of their plan, which is talking about their exchange program and how international students are going to come here. Instead, what we could do is take the billions and billions of dollars that the government is spending and instead use it to finance scholarships for international students to come here, where as a result, our students are still going to get exposure to all of these different countries through their international students. There's no need to send our students to all of these other countries. Now, their third contention was on economic growth, and they talk about how it's going to lead to a more effective allocation of capital. But quite frankly, their plan isn't going to accomplish this goal on a macro scale of better reallocation of capital. We're sending students to go to a country, one spot, their entire college career. Are we really expecting that this is going to somehow allow the United States to streamline our economic capital and make it such that we can invest in other different countries far more effectively? Absolutely not. Do we really expect some 18-year-old college kid to somehow come back and remember in his mid-career that he spent like 2 weeks in Mexico and thus reallocate his entire industry to Mexico? Once again, this idea that merely sending students one semester to go to a different country is going to lead on a macro level for better reallocation of capital in the United States is over-exaggerated. So now onto our contentions of economically infeasibility, the wastefulness of time, and the fact that it's not a holistically effective plan. In response to our first contention on economic infeasibility, side government responded that we can buy plane tickets in bulk, which will reduce costs, and on average, it's not going to be that expensive. But once again, a lot of colleges across the United States are already struggling with funding, already struggling with grants. And this idea that we can merely just make it cheaper by buying plane tickets in bulk to reduce costs is not true. There are a lot of other costs associated with travel, including the places where they're going to stay, including the funding that we have to give to the other countries that we have exchange programs with, which is another component of side government's plan that we're also going to need financing for. Given that the United States is already in so much student loan debt, it's impossible for us to pass this plan. In response to our second contention, where we talk about the fact that it's wasteful of time, side government responded that that students are going to benefit because they're going to learn about different methodologies, and ultimately it's not going to significantly detract from their academic experience, and it's going to help students in the long run. But once again, we can learn about all of these different methodologies, these different scientific modes of conducting experiments in scientific journals. We can have students read more about these instead of actually having to send them to different countries just so they can learn these few things. Now, in response to our third contention, where we talk about it's not holistically effective, I don't think side government entirely understood this contention. Basically, what side opposition meant is that some universities that have far more capital, that have far more financing, are able to get vastly better educational experiences for their students. But to mandate that all United States colleges have to send students to a semester studying out of the country won't be effective, especially for a lot of colleges that don't have as much money, because then they're going to have to be subject to send their students to places that are much cheaper out of necessity, not necessarily out of something that they want. So as a result, we send students to places that are really poor, to places that are really cheap. And as a result, we won't actually be achieving the fundamental values that side government wants of providing for a high quality education. So, what does this debate boil down to? This debate boils down to whether side government effectively accomplishes their plan of providing for the welfare of our students, both through diversifying their opinions, diversifying their thoughts through these new experiences, and leading to the economic growth of the United States as a whole. But once again, throughout this debate, we've seen that side government hasn't shown the most effective way to do this. If we want to expose people to new political ideologies, to new scientific methodologies, we can simply do this once again by sending students to different states within our own country. We can already do this. Side opposition can already do this by making it such that we have students read about these political ideologies without having to immerse them in these different countries, which is once again extremely not cost effective and harmful to the United States federal budget. They talk about economic growth and how there's a more effective allocation of capital. But once again, side opposition has already talked about how it's not actually realistic for us to expect that these college students are going to lead to a long-term, cost-effective and highly streamlined reallocation of capital on a national scale. On the other hand, we've seen significant harms with side government's plan in that it's economically infeasible, it strains federal budget, it strains these college budgets, especially those of poorer colleges, it forces these colleges to spend money that they would otherwise spend on scholarships for students to actually come not only from other international countries, but also for students domestically, because they have to now spend more money on sending these students out of the country. And once again, it's wasteful of time, and we can't guarantee that these opportunities are actually beneficial for these students. It's for all of these reasons Side government's plan doesn't uphold their values of protecting the welfare of our students and protecting the welfare of our country. And for these reasons, Side opposition is proud to oppose.
Mr. Speaker, today we have to prove on Side government that this plan is best for the welfare of our students and of our country. To do that, we have two burdens of proof. If we uphold either one of them, we will have proved this point. One is that we cause cultural and personal growth. The other is we cause an economic benefit. If we win the cultural and personal growth point, which basically means we prove to you that our plan does it better than any of the sub or pseudo counter plans that the opposition produce. If our plan is better than that, we should implement this resolution, and obviously we win the debate that way. But if we can also prove that there's an economic benefit, that the benefits outweigh the costs in terms of the economy, because we both agree that this plan is generally beneficial for cultural and personal growth, even if they think theirs is more effective, our plan should be passed anyway. So if we win either of those today, government wins this debate. And we believe we've won both. Under the cultural and personal growth point, we think that ours is the most effective way. Obviously, let's establish that they believe that our plan will be beneficial, right? Because their argument that it's a waste of time, they conceded by themselves that it's not true by saying that they believe the state version should be passed. And their economically infeasible idea also doesn't make sense, because at worst it costs a few $1 billion, and the country would definitely spare that if it means improving the lives of our students substantially, because it's just not that much money for the country if you're looking at it nationally, especially as an investment to our students' futures. So it's really about whether they think the state version or the getting students to come over, getting foreign students to come over, or the reading way is better than sending students abroad. But at the end of the day, it's not. Reading doesn't give you experience, and the state and getting students here way are not as good either, because they're just not enough. The demographics are just not diverse enough. And if you get people to come over, they're just too much of a minority to truly give you the immersion that you need. At the end of the day, ours is more effective in cultural and personal growth, but also in economic benefits. We talk about the macro economy, and we think we have upheld that point. But it doesn't even matter, because they did not address our individual economic growth point. And to that alone should be enough to win us this debate, in that it helps individual welfare by individually increasing economic growth and economic gains. For those reasons, Mr. Speaker, I urge you to vote in favor of the government today, to help us bridge cultural and personal growth, and to help us make significant economic gains. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.